Hello there, gentle souls. Welcome back to Sleepy Long Scientist, where we turn the mysteries of life into the softest bedtime stories. I'm here with you tonight, wherever you are in this beautiful, quiet world, and I hope you're getting comfortable because we're about to explore something wonderfully intimate, the story that's been quietly writing itself inside you since the moment you were born. Tonight, we're drifting into the gentle world of DNA, that microscopic storyteller living in every cell of your body. Right now, as you're listening to my voice, there's an ancient library nestled inside you containing the most personal book ever written. It's been authored by millions of years of evolution, edited by countless generations of your ancestors, and it's still being written, page by page, breath by breath, as you live your life. This story connects you to every person who's ever lived, every creature that's ever walked the earth, and even to the stars themselves. And here's what makes me smile every time I think about it. You share nearly all of your DNA with every other human, yet you're completely, beautifully unique. Before we begin this gentle journey together, I'm curious, when you look in the mirror, whose eyes do you see looking back at you? Drop a comment and tell me about the family resemblances that make you smile. There's something so quietly magical about family gatherings, isn't there? Last month, I was at my cousin's wedding, and as I watched her walk down the aisle, I suddenly saw my grandmother's graceful way of moving her hands, the same gentle tilt of her head when she smiled. My grandmother passed away years ago, but there she was, somehow present in the way my cousin moved through the world. That's DNA whispering its stories across generations. We all have these soft moments of recognition, don't we? Maybe you've caught yourself laughing exactly like your father, or you've discovered you have your mother's way of humming while you work. Sometimes it's something visible, your grandfather's curly hair appearing in your nephew, or your aunt's unusual eye colour skipping 2 generations to surprise everyone. Sometimes it's deeper, a musical gift that flows like a quiet river through your family, or that particular way of seeing the world that seems to pass from grandparent to grandchild. But here's what fills me with gentle wonder. Your DNA isn't just a record of where you came from. It's actively participating in your story right now in the most subtle and beautiful ways. It's quietly influencing how you experience taste, why certain scents transport you to childhood memories, how your body finds its rhythm through the seasons. Your genetic code is like having an ancient wise friend who's been learning about life for millions of years, and tonight we're going to sit quietly with that friend and listen to some of its stories. Let me share something with you that always fills me with quiet amazement. Right now, as you're settling into this peaceful moment, there are tiny libraries nestled inside every cell of your body. Each one contains the most beautiful instruction manual ever written, not in words or pictures, but in a language that's been quietly perfect for nearly 4 billion years. We call this language DNA, but that scientific name doesn't really capture what it is. Imagine if you could write the most complex, beautiful story ever told using just 4 letters: A, T, G, and C. It sounds impossible, doesn't it? Like trying to paint a sunset using only 4 colors. Yet with these 4 simple chemical letters, nature has been writing the most intricate stories imaginable. Stories of towering redwoods and delicate butterflies, of deep-sea creatures that glow like stars, and human beings who can dream of distant galaxies. The gentle miracle is how much information can rest in something so incredibly small. If you took all the DNA from just one of your cells and very carefully stretched it out, it would reach about 6 feet, roughly your height. But it's coiled so tenderly and precisely that it fits inside a space smaller than the period at the end of this sentence. Now multiply that by the trillion cells in your body, and you're carrying enough genetic information to stretch from Earth to the Sun and back again hundreds of times. You're like a walking library of the universe. This precious information is organized into chapters we call chromosomes, 23 pairs of them in each cell, like volumes in an ancient encyclopedia. Each volume contains thousands of individual stories called genes, and each gene is like a gentle recipe for making the proteins that keep you alive and thriving. Some genes tell your cells how to make the proteins that give you energy. Others create the proteins that help you heal when you're hurt, and still others make the proteins that let you see colors or hear music. The structure of DNA itself is pure poetry. Picture a spiral staircase, gracefully twisted, where each step is made of those 4 chemical letters I mentioned. Scientists call this elegant shape a double helix, and when they first discovered it in the 1950s, it was like finding the secret architectural plans for life itself. The steps of this staircase always pair up in the same gentle way, A with T, G with C, like dance partners who've been waltzing together for millions of years. Here's something that might make you smile as you drift towards sleep. You share about 60% of your DNA with a banana. More than half. You share about 85% with a mouse, 96% with a chimpanzee, and a remarkable 99.9% with every other human being on Earth. Despite all our beautiful differences, different languages, cultures, dreams, and ways of seeing the world, we're nearly identical at the deepest genetic level. So if we're so similar, where does all our wonderful diversity come from? It lives quietly in that tiny 0.1% difference, about 3 million letters out of the 3 billion that make up your genome. It's like having 2 copies of the same enormous book where only a few thousand words are different, but those small changes create all the beautiful variety of human experience. Your eye color, the way you taste cilantro, your natural sleep patterns, whether you can roll your tongue, it all whispers from those gentle variations. What amazes me most is how your cells read this information with such quiet wisdom. Every cell in your body contains the complete instruction manual, but each cell only reads the chapters it needs. A heart cell peacefully ignores the instructions for making fingernails, while a brain cell doesn't concern itself with recipes for digestive enzymes. It's like having a vast cookbook where each kitchen only prepares the meals that are needed for that particular day. Your DNA is also constantly, gently copying itself. Every time a cell divides to replace worn-out cells or help you grow, it makes a careful copy of all 3 billion letters. The fact that this happens with such beautiful accuracy billions of times throughout your life is nothing short of miraculous. Occasionally there are small changes in the copying, we call these mutations, and sometimes these tiny edits lead to the wonderful process of evolution. Your cells even have their own gentle editors, specialized proteins that carefully proofread the genetic text, fixing small errors and making sure everything stays readable. When these systems work harmoniously, your cells function like a peaceful, well-organized community. The most beautiful truth about DNA is that it quietly connects you to every living thing that has ever existed. The same basic code that makes you human also flows through every flower in your garden, every bird that sings outside your window, every tree that gives you shade. We're all chapters in one incredible, interconnected story that's been writing itself for nearly 4 billion years. Your DNA contains gentle echoes of ancient oceans, whispers of early mammals, and the complete, beautiful history of human evolution. You're not just reading this story, you are this story, a living, breathing chapter in the most amazing tale ever told. Imagine, if you will, that every time a baby is born, nature is playing the gentlest game of chance, mixing and matching genetic gifts in ways that create something completely new and wonderful. That's exactly what happened when you were conceived. Your parents each offered half of their genetic treasures, and those gifts combined in a way that had never happened before and will never happen again. You are the beautiful result of the most elegant lottery ever played. There's something so sweetly mysterious about families, isn't there? Perhaps you have siblings, all born from the same loving parents, yet each of you is like a different flower blooming in the same garden. One might have hair that curls like autumn leaves, another with hair as straight as summer grass. One tall and willowy, another compact and strong. One who sees the world through glasses, another with eyes sharp as a hawk's. How can this be when you're all drawing from the same gentle pool of family genes? The answer lies in the beautiful dance that happens before those genes are passed down to you. When your parents created you, each contributed 23 chromosomes, half of their genetic story. But here's the tender magic. They didn't simply hand over the same 23 chromosomes to each child. Before those chromosomes made their journey to you, something wonderful called genetic recombination occurred. Picture your parents' chromosomes as cards in a deck, shuffling and trading pieces with each other in completely random, playful ways. You received a combination that was uniquely, perfectly yours. This is why siblings can be so beautifully different. Let's imagine your parents each carry genes for both brown and blue eyes. The brown eye gene tends to be more assertive, what scientists gently call dominant, while the blue eye gene is more reserved, what we call recessive. You might receive 2 brown eye genes and have eyes like rich earth, while your sister might receive 2 blue eye genes and have eyes like a clear summer sky. Your brother might receive 1 of each and have brown eyes too, but he carries that quiet blue gene, ready to perhaps gift it to his own children someday. But eye color is like a simple lullaby compared to the complex symphonies that create traits like height, intelligence, or the way you laugh. These beautiful characteristics are influenced by hundreds or even thousands of different genes, all working together like musicians in a gentle orchestra. You might inherit your father's genes for being tall, but your mother's genes for a more delicate bone structure, creating a height that's uniquely your own. Some genetic gifts love to play hide and seek across generations, appearing in grandparents, resting quietly in parents, then emerging again in grandchildren like surprise visitors at a family reunion. Maybe your grandmother had the most beautiful singing voice, but none of her children seemed musically inclined. Then suddenly you sit down at a piano and melodies flow from your fingers like water. That musical gift was sleeping peacefully in your family's genetic story, waiting for just the right combination to awaken it. There's something almost playful about how dominant and recessive genes can create gentle surprises. 2 brown-eyed parents might welcome a blue-eyed child if they're both quietly carrying those recessive blue genes. 2 parents with straight hair might have a curly-haired child. 2 parents of average height might raise a child who grows tall enough to touch the sky. It's as if nature delights in plot twists in the genetic stories it tells. Sometimes genetic inheritance feels wonderfully random in its generosity. One sibling might inherit the family's ability to eat anything without worry, while another gets the family tendency to be more mindful about food. One child might receive perfect pitch as a genetic gift. Another might get the family's mathematical mind. One inherits strong bones and rarely gets sick. Another gets the family's sensitive, artistic soul. None of it is personal. It's simply the beautiful, chaotic dance of life. But here's something quite lovely about genetic inheritance. It's not just about the genes you receive, it's about how those genes dance together with your environment and experiences. You might have inherited your grandfather's genes for being tall, but if you didn't get proper nutrition while growing, you might not reach that genetic potential. You might carry your grandmother's genes for artistic talent, but if you never pick up a paintbrush, that gift might sleep forever. There are also family traits that seem to flow like gentle rivers through generations in ways that scientists are still trying to understand. Maybe all the women in your mother's family have an uncanny ability to sense when rain is coming, or all the men in your father's family have this quiet gift for understanding how things work. Some families seem to pass down not just eye colour and height, but also ways of moving through the world, particular sensitivities, or specific ways of seeing beauty. The most wonderful thing about genetic inheritance is how it connects you to an unbroken chain of ancestors stretching back through countless generations. That stubborn streak that helps you persevere? It flowed down from your great-great-grandmother, who used that determination to raise her children during difficult times. Your genes aren't random traits, they're gentle survival strategies that worked so beautifully they made it all the way down to you. Every time you look in the mirror, you're seeing the face of someone whose ancestors were champions, not because they were perfect, but because every single one of them, from the beginning of life itself, lived long enough to pass their genetic gifts to the next generation. You're the newest chapter in the most successful love story ever told, the story of life itself, written in the quiet language of DNA and edited by millions of years of gentle evolution. Every moment of your life, something wonderfully intricate is happening inside your cells, so quietly you'll never notice it, yet so essential that your very existence depends on it. While you're peacefully listening to this, while you're breathing and thinking and dreaming, your DNA is orchestrating the most gentle, sophisticated manufacturing process in the known universe. It's like having millions of tiny, devoted artisans working around the clock to create exactly what your body needs, exactly when it needs it. Picture your cells as the coziest workshops imaginable, and your DNA as the master craftsperson who knows every recipe for keeping you healthy and whole. But here's the tender thing. Your DNA never leaves the safety of the cell's nucleus. It's like a precious original cookbook that's far too valuable to take out of its protective case. So how does the wisdom travel from the protected nucleus to the protein-making workshops scattered throughout your cell? This is where RNA steps in, like DNA's gentle, helpful messenger. When your cell needs to create a specific protein, special enzymes arrive and carefully make a copy of just the relevant section of DNA. But they write this copy in RNA instead. Think of it as translating from one beautiful language to another. This process, called transcription, is like having a devoted scribe who reads from the master cookbook and writes individual recipes on delicate scrolls that can safely travel to where they're needed. The messenger RNA then embarks on a peaceful journey from the nucleus out into the main part of the cell, where it finds structures called ribosomes. These ribosomes are like the most patient, skilled craftspeople you can imagine. They can read the RNA instructions and build proteins one tiny piece at a time, connecting amino acids together like stringing the most delicate beads. The genetic code itself is pure elegance in its simplicity. Those 4 letters of DNA, A, T, G, and C, are read in gentle groups of 3, and each trio has a specific meaning, like a quiet language that's been perfect for billions of years. With 4 letters taken 3 at a time, nature has 64 different words to choose from, which is more than enough to specify the 20 different amino acids that make up all proteins. But creating a protein isn't simply about connecting amino acids like beads on a string. Once the ribosome finishes reading the RNA instructions and linking all the amino acids together, something truly magical happens. The protein begins to fold itself. This isn't random. The sequence of amino acids gently guides exactly how the protein will curl and twist into its final perfect shape. It's like molecular origami, where a simple chain spontaneously transforms into a complex, beautiful sculpture. The shape of each protein is absolutely essential to its quiet work. Enzymes, which are special proteins that help chemical reactions happen smoothly in your body, work because they have exactly the right shape to cradle specific molecules and help them dance together. Antibodies can recognize and gently escort away unwanted visitors because they're shaped precisely to embrace foreign substances. The hemoglobin in your blood can carry oxygen throughout your body because its shape creates the perfect, cozy nest for oxygen molecules. When this protein manufacturing system works in harmony, it's breathtakingly beautiful. Your cells are constantly, peacefully reading genetic instructions and producing thousands of different proteins, enzymes to help you digest your meals, antibodies to keep you healthy, structural proteins to maintain your muscles and bones, transport proteins to carry nutrients where they're needed, and regulatory proteins to keep all the other cellular processes flowing smoothly. Sometimes, though, small changes occur in this cellular workshop, and that's when you truly appreciate how precise and gentle this system normally is. If there's a tiny change in the DNA, what we softly call a mutation, it might alter the RNA message, which could change the protein's recipe, which might change how well that protein can do its quiet work. Sometimes these changes don't matter at all, sometimes they're actually beneficial, and occasionally they can cause problems. Your cells also have their own gentle quality control systems, loving proteins whose only job is to check that other proteins are folding correctly. If they discover a protein that isn't quite right, they either help it fold properly or kindly mark it for recycling. There are also proofreading systems that carefully check the DNA and RNA for any small errors and fix them before they can cause any trouble. What fills me with peaceful amazement is that this entire gentle process, from reading the DNA to creating a functional protein, can happen in just a few quiet minutes. Your cells are creating thousands of different proteins simultaneously, day and night, for your entire life. Every breath you take, every peaceful thought, every beat of your heart depends on this microscopic miracle happening billions of times throughout your body, as softly and reliably as your own breathing. Your DNA is like the world's most ancient journal, and if you could read its gentle script, you would discover that you carry within yourself the stories of every creature that ever lived on Earth. Tonight, as you rest peacefully, know that your genetic code holds whispers of ancient oceans, echoes of the first creatures to walk on land, and the complete, beautiful history of the long journey that led to you. There's something so softly amazing about the fact that you share genetic letters with every living thing around you. More than half of your DNA is identical to that of a banana. Isn't that wonderfully humbling? You share about 85% with a gentle mouse, 96% with a thoughtful chimpanzee, and a remarkable 99.9% with every other human being who has ever lived. This isn't coincidence. It's proof that all life on Earth is one enormous, loving family, like branches on the most magnificent tree ever grown. Scientists have learned to read the quiet signatures in our DNA, like archaeologists reading ancient stories. They can trace the gentle journeys our ancestors made across continents by looking at special genetic markers that get passed down through generations. Your mitochondrial DNA, which travels only from mothers to children, carries the signature of a woman who lived in Africa about 200,000 years ago. She wasn't the only woman alive then, but her genetic line is the one that quietly survived and eventually led to you. Scientists call her mitochondrial Eve, and in a very real sense, she's your ancient grandmother. The story of how human DNA spread across the world reads like the most epic, gentle adventure ever told. Small groups of early humans began leaving Africa around 70,000 years ago, carrying their genetic stories with them like precious seeds. Some groups wandered northeast into Asia, their DNA eventually flowing into the people who would become Chinese, Japanese, and even Native Americans who crossed the land bridge to North America. Others moved northwest into Europe, leaving genetic breadcrumbs that we can still detect in modern Europeans. But here's something that might make you smile. You carry more than just modern human DNA in your cells. If your ancestors came from Europe or Asia, you're carrying around 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA. Yes, you have a little bit of Neanderthal gently living inside you. When modern humans migrated out of Africa and met Neanderthals in Europe and Asia, they didn't just live alongside them, they fell in love, had children together, and those ancient love stories are still written in your genes. Some people also carry DNA from another ancient human species called Denisovans, known mainly from tiny bone fragments found in a cold Siberian cave. The people of Melanesia and Australia carry the highest amounts of Denisovan DNA, sometimes up to 6%. It's like having genetic autographs from human cousins who lived and loved tens of thousands of years ago. Evolution has written some particularly beautiful stories into specific genes that you use every day. Take the gene that helps you digest starchy foods. Populations whose ancestors developed agriculture and began eating lots of grains have multiple copies of this gene, while populations that remained hunter-gatherers typically have fewer copies. Your DNA literally reflects the dietary wisdom of your ancestors, accumulated over thousands of years of learning what foods nourished them best. The story of lactose tolerance is especially lovely. It shows evolution happening in real time within human history. Most mammals naturally lose the ability to digest milk after they're babies, but several human populations independently develop the ability to drink milk throughout their lives. This happened in northern Europeans around 7,500 years ago, in some African populations around 3,000 years ago, and in Middle Eastern populations around 9,000 years ago. If you can drink milk without discomfort, your DNA carries the gentle signature of ancestors who lived peacefully alongside dairy animals. Your DNA also reveals some surprising truths about human unity. Despite all our apparent differences in appearance and culture, humans are actually one of the least genetically diverse species on the planet. Any two humans, no matter how different they might look, are more genetically similar to each other than two chimpanzees from neighbouring troops. This suggests that sometime in our past the human population became very small, perhaps as few as a few thousand individuals, creating what scientists call a genetic bottleneck. Your genes also carry what scientists gently call evolutionary luggage, genetic gifts that served your ancestors well but might be less helpful today. The gene that can cause sickle cell anemia is painful when inherited from both parents, but having one copy actually protects against malaria. In regions where malaria was common, this gene persisted because the protection it offered was worth the risk. Perhaps the most beautiful truth about evolutionary DNA is how it connects you to absolutely everything alive. The genes that control the basic functions of your cells, how they grow, repair themselves, and peacefully end their lives when their work is done, are nearly identical to the same genes in every other living creature. You share the fundamental molecular poetry of life with everything from roses to elephants to the beneficial bacteria living peacefully in your body. Every night when you close your eyes, remember that you're looking through eyes shaped by millions of years of gentle evolution, carrying the genetic legacy of countless ancestors who survived ice ages, migrations, and challenges so they could pass their gifts down to you. You're not just human, you're the current beautiful chapter in the greatest love story ever told. When you hear the word mutation, you might think of something scary or dangerous. But let me share a gentle truth that might change how you see these genetic changes forever. Mutations are simply nature's way of editing the story of life, and every wonderful thing about you, every beneficial trait, every adaptation that helped your ancestors thrive, every beautiful human ability began as a tiny random change in someone's genetic story long ago. A mutation is really just a small typo in the genetic instruction manual. Imagine copying a book that's 3 billion letters long over and over again, billions of times throughout a lifetime. Occasionally, there's going to be a small mistake. Maybe an A gets copied as a T, or a letter gets accidentally skipped. Most of the time, these tiny changes don't matter much, like writing te instead of the, you can still understand the meaning perfectly well. The beautiful truth is that the vast majority of mutations are completely neutral. They don't help you or hurt you, they just exist as quiet variations in your genetic code. These neutral mutations are like gentle background music in your DNA, and they're actually quite useful to scientists because they act like molecular clocks, helping us understand how different groups of people are related and when they separated from each other in history. But occasionally, a mutation creates something truly wonderful. Take lactose tolerance, which we've talked about before. The original human story was to stop producing the enzyme that digests milk after childhood, just like every other mammal. But then, in several different places around the world, gentle mutations occurred that kept this enzyme working throughout adult life. In regions where people had learned to live alongside dairy animals, this small genetic change meant access to a rich, nourishing source of food that sustained entire populations. Some mutations create what seem like gentle superpowers. There's a mutation that makes some people naturally resistant to HIV infection. Another affects bone density, creating people whose bones are so strong they rarely break, even in accidents that would injure others. There are mutations that affect muscle fibers, creating natural athletes who can run for hours without tiring or lift heavy things with ease, without any special training. One of the most elegant examples of beneficial mutations involves something called sickle cell trait. Having 2 copies of the sickle cell gene can cause serious health problems, but having just 1 copy provides powerful protection against malaria. In regions where malaria was common, this mutation persisted because the protection it offered was worth the small risk. It's like nature's own gentle cost-benefit analysis written into the genetic code. What's particularly beautiful about mutations is how random and unplanned they are. Evolution doesn't look ahead or try to solve problems. It simply creates gentle variations, and the ones that happen to be helpful in a particular environment tend to survive and spread. The mutation that gives some people incredibly efficient kidneys that can conserve water in dry climates didn't develop because people needed to live in deserts. It just happened randomly, and when people with this mutation found themselves in arid environments, they had a quiet advantage. Sometimes mutations create traits that seem neutral or even slightly challenging in our modern world, but were probably quite beneficial for our ancestors. The tendency to crave and efficiently store fats and sugars served our ancestors beautifully during times when food was scarce. But in our current world of abundant processed foods, those same genetic tendencies can sometimes contribute to health challenges. Our DNA is still gently optimized for the world our ancestors lived in, not necessarily the world we inhabit today. Many mutations simply create the beautiful diversity we see in human appearance without being particularly beneficial or harmful. Different eye colors, hair textures, skin tones, and facial features often result from mutations that occurred thousands of years ago and then spread peacefully through populations. The genetic variation that creates the incredible spectrum of human beauty started as random changes in DNA that happened to persist because they didn't cause problems and sometimes even provided quiet advantages. Modern genetics has revealed that we all carry dozens of genetic variations that could potentially cause problems, but usually don't because we have 2 copies of every gene, and typically 1 working copy is enough. It's like having a backup copy of every important file. Even if one gets corrupted, you're usually still fine. It's only when someone inherits the same problematic variation from both parents that genetic challenges typically appear. The most quietly amazing thing about mutations is that they're happening in you right now as you peacefully listen to this. Every day, sunlight, natural background radiation, and normal cellular processes create new mutations in your cells. Most get repaired immediately by your cells' gentle quality control systems, but some slip through. The mutations that occur in cells that might become eggs or sperm could potentially be passed on to your children, making them part of the ongoing human evolutionary story. You are literally a beautiful collection of millions of years of successful genetic plot twists, random changes that happen to work out well enough to survive to the present day. Every breath you take, every peaceful thought, every unique thing about you exists because countless ancestors accumulated beneficial mutations that made your existence possible. Just a few years ago, if you wanted to understand your genetic heritage, you'd have to rely on family stories passed down through generations, faded photographs, and perhaps some dusty genealogy records that might or might not tell the complete truth. Today, something quite magical is possible. You can gently provide a small sample of your DNA and receive a detailed map of your ancestral journey spanning tens of thousands of years. It's like having a time machine that can read the quiet diary your ancestors left written in your cells. But here's something lovely to understand about genetic testing. It's not actually reading your entire genetic novel. Instead, it's taking gentle peeks at specific pages scattered throughout your genetic book and making thoughtful guesses about the whole story. Most consumer DNA tests examine about 700,000 specific spots in your genome out of the 3 billion letters that make up your complete genetic code. These spots are chosen because they're known to vary between different populations and can whisper stories about ancestry, health tendencies, and certain traits. The ancestry portion of DNA testing is genuinely fascinating and surprisingly accurate for broad geographical regions. When your test gently suggests you're 35% Northwestern European, 20% Scandinavian, and 15% Eastern European, it's comparing your genetic markers to reference populations from those regions. But here's something important to keep in mind. These percentages aren't as precise as they might appear. Different companies might give you somewhat different results, not because one is right and another wrong, but because human migration and mixing over thousands of years makes these boundaries beautifully fuzzy. Sometimes people receive DNA test results that completely surprise them and gently upend their family stories. Perhaps you grew up believing you were entirely Irish, only to discover significant Scandinavian ancestry from Viking journeys centuries ago. Or maybe your family always spoke of Cherokee heritage, but your DNA shows no Native American markers at all. These surprises happen more often than you might expect, because family stories sometimes grow and change over generations, records get lost, and occasionally people had good reasons for keeping certain aspects of their background private. The health-related information from genetic testing is where things become both wonderfully exciting and appropriately complex. Some tests can tell you if you carry genetic variations associated with increased tendencies towards certain conditions like heart disease or particular cancers. But here's the crucial, gentle truth to remember. Having a genetic risk factor doesn't mean you will definitely develop a condition, and not having known risk factors doesn't mean you're protected from everything. Take the BRCA1 and BRCA2, gene variations associated with increased breast cancer risk. Having these variations does significantly increase risk, but it doesn't guarantee anything will happen. Many people with these variations never develop cancer, while many people who do develop breast cancer don't have these genetic markers. The information can be valuable for making informed health decisions, but it benefits from careful interpretation, preferably with the gentle guidance of a genetic counselor. Genetic testing has also quietly revealed some family secrets that people weren't prepared to discover. What scientists politely call non-paternity events show up in about 2 to 3% of DNA tests. Sometimes this reveals long-ago affairs, adoptions that were never discussed, or even rare cases where hospitals accidentally switched babies. DNA doesn't lie, and it doesn't consider family feelings, which is why many people suggest having thoughtful conversations with family members before testing. The raw data from genetic testing can tell you charming things about yourself beyond ancestry and health risks. Some tests can predict whether you're naturally a morning person or night owl, whether you're genetically inclined to prefer sweet or savory foods, how your body processes caffeine, and even whether you're likely to have wet or dry earwax. These traits might seem trivial, but they're actually beautiful examples of how genetics quietly influences the tiny details of daily life. Privacy is becoming an important consideration as genetic testing becomes more popular. When you share your DNA with a testing company, you're not just revealing information about yourself, you're potentially sharing information about your relatives, including relatives who never consented to genetic testing. Law enforcement has begun using genetic databases to solve old crimes by finding relatives of suspects, which helps bring closure to families but also raises gentle questions about genetic privacy. The future of genetic testing is moving toward much more comprehensive analysis. Instead of looking at scattered genetic markers, we're heading toward affordable whole genome sequencing that will read every single letter of your genetic code. This will provide much more detailed information about health tendencies, drug responses, and ancestry, but it will also raise new questions about privacy and what we really want to know about our genetic futures. Perhaps the most beautiful thing about genetic testing is how it reveals our fundamental human connectedness. Every test confirms that we're all part of one big, wonderful human family that's been mixing and migrating and adapting for thousands of years. Your DNA is a love letter from the past, written by ancestors you'll never meet, but whose genetic gifts made your existence possible. For most of the gentle history of genetics, we believed that your DNA was your quiet destiny, that the genetic gifts you received at birth would determine your traits, your health tendencies, and your biological future for the rest of your life. It was a beautiful but somewhat fixed view of human biology. Then scientists discovered something absolutely wonderful that changed everything we thought we knew about genetics. They found that your genes can be gently turned on and off, that your daily experiences can softly rewrite parts of your genetic story, and that some of these tender changes can even be passed down to your children like quiet blessings. Think of your DNA as a vast, peaceful library with millions of books, but not all the books are available for reading at any given time. Epigenetics is like having a gentle librarian who decides which books are accessible and which ones are resting quietly on the shelves. Chemical tags called methyl groups can attach to your DNA and essentially help certain genes sleep peacefully, while other modifications can wake genes up and make them more active. The beautiful thing is that these chemical tags respond to your environment, your experiences, your daily choices, and even your relationships with others. The most poignant example of epigenetics comes from a difficult period in Dutch history called the Hunger Winter of 1944 to 1945, when food supplies were blocked during World War II. Pregnant women during this time were severely malnourished, and their children were born smaller than usual. But here's where the story becomes both heartbreaking and illuminating. Decades later, scientists found that these children had higher rates of diabetes, obesity, and heart disease as adults, even though they had access to adequate nutrition their entire lives after birth. The famine had gently but permanently changed the chemical tags on their DNA in ways that affected their health throughout their lives. Even more remarkably, some of these epigenetic changes were quietly passed down to the next generation. The grandchildren of women who were pregnant during the Dutch Hunger Winter also showed increased rates of certain health challenges, even though they were never exposed to famine themselves. It's as if the stress of that difficult time became softly written into the family's genetic code and passed down like an invisible inheritance. Your daily life is constantly creating gentle epigenetic changes in your cells. When you exercise regularly, it doesn't just make your muscles stronger, it actually changes the chemical tags on genes involved in muscle function, metabolism, and inflammation. When you eat foods rich in certain nutrients like folate and B vitamins, you're providing the gentle materials your cells need to make healthy epigenetic modifications. When you experience chronic stress, it can create epigenetic changes that affect genes involved in immune function, but when you find peace and relaxation, those patterns can often be softly reversed. Sleep is another powerful epigenetic influence. When you don't get enough restful sleep, it changes the activity of hundreds of genes involved in metabolism, immune function, and cellular repair. Just 1 week of sleeping less than 6 hours per night can create detectable changes in gene expression. The lovely news is that these changes are often reversible. Improve your sleep habits, and many of the beneficial gene expression patterns gently return. Social relationships and emotional experiences also leave tender epigenetic marks on your DNA. Social relationships and emotional experiences also leave tender epigenetic marks on your DNA. Studies of children who experience severe neglect or trauma early in life show lasting changes in genes involved in stress response and emotional regulation. But remarkably, supportive relationships and gentle healing can sometimes reverse these changes. Love, care, and emotional support aren't just good for your heart. They can literally change your gene expression in beneficial ways, like having healing conversations with your own cells. The field of nutritional epigenetics is revealing how specific foods can quietly influence which genes are active in your body. Compounds found in green tea, turmeric, leafy vegetables, and berries can affect the chemical tags on your DNA in ways that may reduce inflammation and support healthy aging. It's not that these foods change your actual genetic sequence, but they can influence how those genes express themselves, potentially affecting your well-being in profound yet gentle ways. Perhaps most hopeful is the discovery that many epigenetic changes are reversible. Unlike genetic mutations, which permanently alter the DNA sequence, epigenetic modifications can often be gently undone. This has opened up entirely new approaches to supporting health. Instead of trying to fix broken genes, scientists are working on ways to restore healthy gene expression patterns through epigenetic therapies, like teaching your genes to remember their healthiest songs. Exercise provides one of the most beautiful examples of beneficial epigenetic change. When previously sedentary people begin gentle, regular movement, within just a few weeks, scientists can detect changes in the epigenetic marks on thousands of genes involved in muscle function, energy metabolism, and cardiovascular health. It's as if exercise sends a quiet signal throughout your body saying, "We're becoming stronger and more vibrant," and your genes respond by changing their activity patterns to support these positive adaptations. The implications of epigenetics for understanding human health and behavior are both profound and comforting. It means that your genetic destiny isn't fixed at birth. It's constantly being influenced by your choices, your experiences, and your environment. The stress you experience, the food you eat, the relationships you nurture, the movement you enjoy, and even the thoughts you think may all be leaving gentle molecular signatures on your DNA that could affect your well-being and potentially the well-being of your future children. This knowledge is incredibly empowering because it means you have much more influence over your genetic expression than we ever thought possible. While you can't change the DNA sequence you inherited from your parents, you can gently influence how those genes are expressed through the choices you make every single day. Your genes are not your destiny, they're more like a gentle piano, and your lifestyle choices are the melodies you play on those keys. Imagine, if you will, that you could take a beloved book with a few small errors, and instead of having to live with those mistakes forever, you could use the most precise editing tool imaginable to gently correct just those specific problems while leaving everything else exactly as it was written. For most of human history, This kind of delicate editing was impossible when it came to DNA. If there was a genetic challenge, we had to learn to live with it or find ways to work around its effects. Then, in 2012, scientists discovered something that would change everything in the most gentle yet revolutionary way. A system called CRISPR that works like molecular scissors combined with the most precise guidance system ever created. CRISPR stands for something wonderfully complex sounding: clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. But the basic concept is surprisingly elegant and beautiful. Scientists essentially borrowed a defense system that bacteria have been quietly using for millions of years to protect themselves from viruses. When a virus attacks a bacterium, the bacterium captures small pieces of the viral DNA and stores them like genetic photographs. If that same virus attacks again, the bacterium can recognize it immediately and deploy molecular scissors to gently cut up the viral DNA before it can cause harm. What makes CRISPR truly revolutionary is that scientists figured out how to reprogram this bacterial defense system to target any specific sequence of DNA they choose. It's like having a find and replace function for genetics. You can program CRISPR to search through the entire genome, find exactly the sequence you're looking for, make a precise cut, and either remove something problematic or replace it with something beneficial. The precision is absolutely breathtaking. It can target a single letter out of the 3 billion letters in the human genome without disturbing anything else. The medical applications of CRISPR are already quietly changing lives in ways that would have seemed like gentle magic just a decade ago. Scientists have successfully used CRISPR to help people with sickle cell disease by editing their bone marrow cells to produce healthy hemoglobin instead of the misshapen proteins that cause pain and complications. Children with certain forms of inherited blindness are having their vision restored through CRISPR treatments that fix the genetic variations in their retinal cells. Researchers are working peacefully on CRISPR therapies for many other genetic conditions that have long been considered unchangeable. But CRISPR isn't just about addressing genetic challenges, it's also opening up possibilities that gently push the boundaries of what we consider normal human biology. Scientists are thoughtfully exploring whether CRISPR could be used to enhance human capabilities rather than just treat diseases. Could we edit genes to make people more resistant to radiation, allowing safer exploration of space? Could we enhance immune systems to better recognize and address cancer cells? Could we edit genes related to aging and extend healthy human lifespan? These questions are no longer purely theoretical. They're active areas of careful research. The agricultural applications of CRISPR are equally transformative and gentle. Scientists are creating crops that can survive droughts, grow in challenging soils, or produce higher levels of essential nutrients. Unlike traditional genetic modification, which often involves inserting genes from completely different species, CRISPR can make precise changes that could have occurred naturally through traditional breeding, just much faster and more efficiently. We're talking about rice that can survive flooding, wheat that doesn't trigger sensitivities, and fruits that stay fresh longer without chemical preservatives. Environmental applications of CRISPR are perhaps the most ambitious and thoughtfully considered. Scientists are exploring whether gene editing could help save endangered species by increasing their genetic diversity or helping them adapt to changing climates. There's even research into using CRISPR to modify mosquitoes so they can't transmit diseases like malaria or dengue fever, potentially preventing millions of deaths. But these environmental applications require careful consideration of unintended consequences and our responsibility when we start gently editing the genetics of wild populations. The ethical conversations surrounding CRISPR are as important as the scientific breakthroughs are exciting. When a Chinese scientist announced in 2018 that he had used CRISPR to edit the genes of human embryos, creating the world's first gene-edited babies, the scientific community responded with widespread concern. The worry isn't just about safety, although editing embryos does carry unknown risks. It's about the broader implications of creating genetic changes that will be passed down to future generations. The prospect of so-called designer babies raises gentle but profound questions about equality, diversity, and what kinds of genetic modifications should be considered acceptable. If CRISPR becomes widely available for enhancing human traits, could it create new forms of inequality between the genetically enhanced and unmodified? Will parents feel pressured to edit their children's genes to give them advantages? How do we preserve the beautiful diversity of human genetics while also preventing genetic diseases? What's remarkable about CRISPR is how quickly it's moved from laboratory curiosity to clinical reality. The first CRISPR clinical trials began just a few years after the technology was developed, and new applications are being discovered regularly. We're living through a period of unprecedented gentle power over the fundamental code of life, and the choices we make about how to use this technology will quietly shape the future of human biology for generations to come. Sometimes the most beautiful stories have chapters that break our hearts, and the story written in our DNA is no exception. Genetic diseases are like gentle typos in the instruction manual of life, small changes in the genetic code that can have profound effects on how a person's story unfolds. But here's what I want you to understand as you rest peacefully tonight. These aren't failures or flaws in the grand design of life. They're quiet reminders of just how intricate and delicate the balance is that keeps us healthy. And they're also inspiring some of the most incredible medical breakthroughs of our time. Most genetic conditions fall into two gentle categories, and understanding the difference helps explain why some seem to flow through families while others appear unexpectedly. Single gene disorders are caused by changes in just one gene, and they often follow predictable inheritance patterns that families can trace through generations like quiet rivers. Conditions like sickle cell disease, cystic fibrosis, or Huntington's disease are caused by specific, identifiable changes in single genes, and if you inherit the challenging version of that gene, the condition will likely develop. Then there are complex genetic conditions, which are like puzzles with hundreds of gentle pieces. Conditions like diabetes, heart disease, most cancers, and even depression involve multiple genes working together, influenced by environmental factors, lifestyle choices, and the beautiful randomness of life itself. These are much harder to predict because you might inherit some genetic risk factors but not others, and whether you actually develop the condition depends on how all these factors dance together throughout your life. What's both heartbreaking and fascinating about single gene disorders is how they demonstrate the incredible precision required for normal human function. Take cystic fibrosis, which gently affects about 30,000 people in the United States. It's caused by changes in a gene called CFTR that makes a protein responsible for moving salt and water in and out of cells. When this protein doesn't work properly, it affects the lungs, digestive system, and other organs. The most common variation is just a deletion of 3 letters out of the thousands that make up the CFTR gene, such a tiny change with such significant effects. Huntington's disease tells an even more precise story about genetic timing. It's caused by a section of DNA that contains too many repeats of the same 3-letter sequence. Everyone has some repeats in this region, but when you have more than about 40 repeats, it causes the disease. What's particularly difficult about Huntington's is that it typically doesn't appear until middle age, often after people have already had children and potentially passed the genetic variation on to the next generation. But here's where the story becomes filled with hope. Understanding the genetic basis of these conditions has opened up treatment possibilities that would have been unimaginable just a few decades ago. Gene therapy, where healthy copies of genes are gently delivered to replace challenging ones, has already helped restore sight to people with certain forms of inherited blindness and strengthened immune systems in children with severe immune deficiencies. Children who would have faced life-threatening complications from severe combined immunodeficiency are now living healthy, full lives thanks to gene therapy that helps their immune systems function properly. The development of treatments for genetic diseases often requires incredible creativity and gentleness from scientists and doctors. For spinal muscular atrophy, a genetic condition that affects muscle strength, researchers developed a treatment that delivers a healthy copy of the affected gene directly to motor neurons. While these treatments can be expensive, for many families they represent hope that was previously unimaginable. Genetic counselling has become an incredibly important and compassionate field as we've learned more about inherited conditions. Genetic counsellors help families understand their risks, make informed decisions about testing and treatment, and navigate the complex emotional landscape of genetic disease. They might work with a couple who both carry the gene for cystic fibrosis and want to understand their options for having healthy children, or with someone who has a family history of Huntington's disease and is deciding whether to get tested. The emotional impact of genetic diseases extends far beyond the individuals who have them. Family members often struggle with guilt, wondering if they passed on a genetic condition or if they could have done something to prevent it. Some people choose not to have children because they carry genetic risks, while others pursue careful family planning to avoid passing on genetic diseases. These aren't just medical decisions, they're deeply personal choices about family, identity, and what it means to live with genetic uncertainty. What gives me gentle hope about the future of genetic diseases is how rapidly our treatment options are expanding. CRISPR gene editing, RNA therapies, and other innovative approaches are moving from laboratory experiments to clinical trials at an encouraging pace. We're also getting better at predicting and preventing genetic diseases through improved screening and early intervention. Most importantly, we're learning that having a genetic condition doesn't define a person's worth or potential. People with genetic conditions are living fuller, longer, more independent lives than ever before, thanks to medical advances, supportive technologies, and changing social attitudes. The stories written in our DNA may sometimes include difficult chapters, but they're still stories worth telling, worth living, and worth celebrating with gentle compassion. Here's something that fills me with quiet wonder every time I think about it. Every living thing you've ever encountered, from the tiniest bacteria quietly working in your garden soil to the mightiest oak tree swaying gently outside your window, from your beloved pet peacefully sleeping nearby to the mushrooms growing silently in the forest, is speaking the exact same genetic language that's written in your own cells. DNA isn't just the human instruction manual, it's the universal, gentle language of life itself. And once you understand this beautiful truth, you'll never look at the natural world quite the same way again. Right now, as you're resting comfortably, there are trillions of bacteria living peacefully in and on your body, and every single one of them uses the same basic genetic code that you do. The same four-letter alphabet, A, T, G, and C, that writes your story also writes theirs. The genetic instructions that tell your cells how to make proteins follow the exact same gentle rules as the instructions that tell a rosebush how to create its thorns, or a firefly how to glow softly in the summer evening. It's like discovering that every book ever written, in every language throughout history, actually uses the same underlying alphabet. The plant kingdom offers some of the most quietly amazing examples of DNA diversity and similarity. That gentle oak tree outside has about 28,000 genes, nearly 10,000 more genes than you do. Plants need all those extra genes because they have to create everything they need to survive from basic materials. They can't seek food or shelter like animals can. They have to peacefully convert sunlight into energy, manufacture their own defense compounds against insects and diseases, and survive whatever weather nature offers, all while staying rooted in one place their entire lives. What's particularly fascinating is how plants have solved challenges that humans are still working to understand. Many plants can regenerate entire organisms from just a small cutting. Imagine if you could regrow an entire arm from a single cell. Some plants have evolved genes that allow them to thrive in incredibly challenging environments. Desert plants that can survive for months without water, Arctic plants that can freeze solid and thaw out perfectly fine, and deep-sea plants that flourish in crushing pressure and complete darkness. The animal kingdom shows us just how creative evolution can be with the same basic genetic toolkit. Bioluminescent animals like fireflies and deep-sea creatures have genes that produce proteins called luciferases, which create light through gentle chemical reactions. Electric eels have specialized genes that create biological batteries, generating enough electricity to navigate their watery world. Arctic fish have genes that produce antifreeze proteins, preventing ice crystals from forming in their blood even in sub-zero temperatures. But perhaps the most important DNA stories being written today are happening quietly in the microbial world. Bacteria are evolution's ultimate experimenters. They reproduce so quickly that they can evolve new traits in real time, sometimes within hours or days. This is how antibiotic resistance develops so rapidly. When bacteria encounter antibiotics, most die peacefully, but any that happen to have genes for resistance survive and multiply. Within a few generations, you have a population of bacteria that's completely resistant to that antibiotic. Viruses tell some of the most unusual DNA stories of all. Technically, viruses aren't even considered fully alive because they can't reproduce on their own. They have to gently borrow other cells' genetic machinery to make copies of themselves. Some viruses, like HIV, actually insert their DNA directly into their host's genome, becoming a quiet, permanent part of the cell's genetic code. About 8% of the human genome consists of viral DNA that was inserted by ancient infections and simply stayed there, becoming part of our genetic heritage. The interconnectedness of all life becomes really apparent when you look at genetic conservation efforts. Scientists are using DNA analysis to help save endangered species by understanding their genetic diversity, identifying distinct populations, and even bringing species back from the brink of extinction. They're also discovering that many ecosystems depend on genetic diversity. Forests with greater genetic variety among their trees are more resilient to diseases and climate changes. One of the most remarkable recent discoveries is how much genetic material gets shared between different species through what scientists call horizontal gene transfer, especially in the microbial world. Bacteria routinely and peacefully swap genes with each other, even between completely different species. It's like having a genetic library where organisms can gently share useful genes. Need resistance to a particular toxin? There's probably a bacterium somewhere that has developed that gene and is willing to share. Climate change is quietly creating new chapters in the DNA stories of countless species as they adapt to changing temperatures, altered precipitation patterns, and shifting ecosystems. Some species are evolving rapidly in response to these changes, while others are working hard to adapt quickly enough. Understanding these genetic responses is crucial for conservation efforts and for gently predicting how ecosystems will change in the coming decades. The beautiful truth is that DNA connects every living thing on Earth in one vast interconnected web of genetic relationships that spans billions of years and countless species, all peacefully sharing the same fundamental language of life. For decades, scientists looked at the human genome and discovered something that seemed completely puzzling. About 98% of our DNA doesn't appear to code for proteins. Since proteins do most of the actual work in our cells, Researchers initially assumed that all this non-coding DNA was basically useless evolutionary leftovers, like genetic attic space that had quietly accumulated random items over millions of years. They even gave it a somewhat dismissive name: junk DNA. But here's a gentle lesson about calling something junk. You might want to be very careful before you decide to throw it away, because you might discover it was actually treasure that you simply didn't understand yet. The story of junk DNA is one of the most humbling chapters in modern genetics, because it shows how easily we can mistake our temporary ignorance for permanent knowledge. When scientists first started carefully mapping the human genome, they were expecting to find maybe 100,000 genes, because humans are obviously much more complex than simpler organisms. Instead, they found only about 20,000 genes, barely more than a tiny roundworm and fewer than some plants. This was gently shocking. How could humans, with all our wonderful complexity, have roughly the same number of genes as a microscopic creature? The answer, it turns out, was resting quietly in plain sight in all that so-called junk DNA. What scientists initially dismissed as useless genetic debris has turned out to be an incredibly sophisticated regulatory system that softly controls when, where, and how much of each gene gets expressed. It's like discovering that what you thought was a pile of random clutter in your grandmother's attic was actually an elaborate control center that had been quietly managing your entire house this whole time. These non-coding regions of DNA contain what are essentially genetic switches, dimmers, and timers that determine which genes are active in which cells at which times. A heart cell and a brain cell contain exactly the same DNA, but they look and function completely differently because different sets of regulatory sequences are gently telling different genes to turn on or off. Without these regulatory elements, every cell in your body would be trying to do everything at once. Your skin cells would try to beat like heart cells, while your liver cells would try to think like neurons. Some of the most important discoveries about junk DNA have come from studying genetic diseases. Scientists noticed that many disease-causing mutations don't actually occur in genes themselves, but in the regulatory regions that control those genes. It's like having a perfectly good light bulb that doesn't work because there's a gentle problem with the switch. You could examine the bulb carefully all day trying to figure out what's wrong, but the real issue is in the wiring you can't easily see. Long non-coding RNAs represent another category of genetic mystery that's being gently solved. These are like genes that don't make proteins, but instead create RNA molecules that regulate other genes. Some of these regulatory RNAs are incredibly long, thousands of letters, and they can quietly control the activity of dozens of other genes. It's like having genetic conductors that orchestrate entire symphonies of gene expression, making sure all the different instruments come in at exactly the right time and play at precisely the right volume. Evolutionary remnants in our genome tell fascinating, gentle stories about our deep history. There are sequences in our DNA that are clearly broken genes, genes that worked perfectly well in our ancestors but have accumulated so many small changes over time that they no longer function. Humans have a broken gene for making vitamin C, which is why we need to get vitamin C from our diet, while most other animals can peacefully make their own. We have quiet remnants of genes for producing egg yolk proteins, even though humans stopped laying eggs hundreds of millions of years ago. Transposable elements, sometimes called jumping genes, make up nearly half of the human genome. These are DNA sequences that can copy themselves and insert the copies in new locations throughout the genome. They're like genetic travelers that have been copying themselves and peacefully spreading through our DNA for millions of years. For a long time, scientists thought these were just genomic hitchhikers, but we're now discovering that some of them play important roles in gene regulation and evolution. The ENCODE project, which aimed to identify all the functional elements in the human genome, has revealed that the vast majority of our DNA shows some sign of quiet biochemical activity. Even if we don't understand what all these regions do, the evidence suggests that most of our genome is doing something, even if that something is subtle or only becomes important under specific conditions. The gentle lesson of junk DNA is profound. Just because we don't understand something doesn't mean it's useless. Nature rarely keeps truly unnecessary things around for millions of years. Our genome is like an ancient library where most of the books are written in languages we're still peacefully learning to read. We're quietly standing at the edge of a genetic revolution that's going to make the past few decades of DNA discoveries look like the gentle opening chapter of a much grander story. Right now, in peaceful laboratories around the world, scientists are developing technologies that will softly transform what it means to be human, how we address disease, and even how we think about life itself. The future of genetics isn't just about understanding our DNA anymore. It's about gently rewriting it, enhancing it, and using it in ways that would have seemed like the most beautiful magic just a generation ago. Personalized medicine is already quietly moving from science fiction to everyday reality. In the very near future, when you visit your doctor, they'll be able to sequence your entire genome in a matter of hours for less than the cost of a nice meal. Your genetic profile will gently guide your doctor to know exactly which medications will work best for you, which ones might cause unwanted effects, and what doses will be most effective based on how your specific genetic variations affect how your body processes different treatments. No more gentle trial and error with medications. Your DNA will provide a personalized roadmap for your medical care. Cancer treatment is being quietly revolutionized by our understanding of genetics in ways that are absolutely beautiful. Doctors are already using genetic analysis of tumors to identify specific mutations driving each individual cancer, then designing personalized treatments that target those exact genetic weaknesses. CAR T-cell therapy involves taking a patient's own immune cells, gently engineering them to better recognize and address cancer cells, then putting them back into the patient's body where they become living, personalized healing agents. The field of regenerative medicine is peacefully pushing into territory that sounds like it belongs in the gentlest fairy tale. Scientists are learning how to reprogram adult cells back into stem cells, which can then be coaxed to become any type of cell needed. Heart muscle to repair damaged hearts, neurons to help with spinal cord injuries, insulin-producing cells to address diabetes. Some researchers are even working on growing entire organs from a patient's own cells, eliminating the need for organ donors and the risk of rejection. Genetic enhancement is the quiet elephant in the room that everyone's thinking about, but few are willing to discuss openly. As our understanding of genes that influence intelligence, physical performance, disease resistance, and even aging improves, the question isn't whether we'll be able to enhance these traits, it's whether we should. Some countries are already allowing certain types of genetic enhancement, while others are gently prohibiting it entirely. The choices we make in the next few decades will determine whether genetic enhancement becomes a tool for reducing human suffering or a source of new forms of inequality. Longevity research is quietly uncovering genetic factors that influence how we age, and the implications are both profound and gentle. Scientists have identified genes that, when modified, can significantly extend lifespan in laboratory animals. They're studying people who live to be over 100 to understand what genetic factors contribute to exceptional longevity and health. The possibility of extending healthy human lifespan from the current maximum of around 120 years to 150, 200, or even longer is no longer purely theoretical. It's an active area of peaceful research with real potential. Artificial biology is taking genetic engineering to completely new, gentle levels. Scientists are designing and building entirely new genetic circuits that don't exist in nature, creating cells that can perform novel functions like producing clean biofuels, manufacturing life-saving medications, or even computing like biological computers. Some researchers are working on creating completely synthetic organisms with artificially designed genomes, essentially creating new forms of life from scratch with gentle precision. The ethical frameworks we develop for genetic technologies will be just as important as the technologies themselves. We're going to need new laws, new ethical guidelines, and new ways of thinking about consent, privacy, and equality in a world where genetic modification is commonplace. How do we ensure that genetic enhancements don't create a new class system based on genetic advantages? How do we protect genetic privacy while still allowing beneficial research? How do we make genetic therapies accessible to everyone who needs them? Environmental applications of genetic technologies could help address some of humanity's biggest challenges in the most peaceful ways. Scientists are developing genetically modified organisms that can clean up pollution, capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and restore damaged ecosystems. They're working on crops that can grow in increasingly challenging climates and provide better nutrition to address global food security. The next decade will likely bring gentle breakthroughs that we can barely imagine today. Genetic technologies are advancing so peacefully yet rapidly that what seems impossible now might be routine medical practice within a few years. We're not just reading the book of life anymore, we're becoming its gentle editors, and the stories we choose to write will quietly shape the future of humanity itself. The question isn't whether these technologies will transform our world, it's how we'll choose to use them to create a more beautiful, equitable future for everyone. Here we are, gentle souls, at the peaceful end of our incredible journey through the most personal story ever told, the story written softly in your DNA. We've travelled together from the basic building blocks of genetic code to the quiet frontiers of genetic engineering, and what a beautiful, contemplative adventure it's been. We've discovered that you're walking around with a 4-billion-year-old instruction manual nestled inside every cell, carrying the genetic whispers of ancient migrations, evolutionary adaptations, and countless ancestors who survived against incredible odds just so you could be here, peacefully listening to this story tonight. We've seen how your DNA gently connects you to every living thing on Earth, how it can be influenced by your daily choices through the quiet magic of epigenetics, and how it's opening doors to medical treatments that would have seemed like the gentlest miracles just a few decades ago. We've explored the beautiful randomness of genetic inheritance, the hope offered by CRISPR and gene therapy, and the thoughtful questions we'll need to answer as we gain more gentle power over the code of life itself. But perhaps the most beautiful truth we've uncovered together is that your DNA isn't just a static blueprint. It's a dynamic, living story that's still being written. Every day, your choices, your experiences, and your environment are quietly adding new chapters to this genetic narrative. You're not just the product of your genes. You're an active, gentle participant in shaping how those genes express themselves throughout your peaceful life. As you drift off to sleep tonight, remember that you're carrying within you the most incredible library ever assembled, a collection of genetic wisdom accumulated over billions of years of quiet evolution. You are, quite literally, a walking miracle, a unique combination of genetic poetry that has never existed before and will never exist again. Sweet dreams, beautiful genetic storytellers, and thank you for letting me share this amazing journey through the gentle book of life with you.